Hello, everyone. I'd like to start this conversation by asking you about the changing perception of yoga. Yoga, as we know, has been around for centuries, and since the time it's been an oral tradition too. How do you see this changing perception of yoga through history? Um,
Well, I think you don't really have to go very far in history to see the changing perceptions of yoga. Now, most people in the audience would have gone to at least one yoga class in some form or the other. And most people in the audience, your grandparents and maybe even great grandparents would have gone to a yoga class. So, but if you see the kind of teacher that your parents had and your grandparents had, and the kind of teachers now, there's a huge difference. Usually, your grandparents would have had like a yoga sir who was coming in, kurta pajama, and a lot of chanting, a lot of breathing. But now, if you look at the yoga teachers that you may go to, a lot of them are in like sports bras, a lot of spandex, yoga pants, and so you don't have to go really far back in history to see how yoga has changed. And yoga is such a living and breathing philosophy that it is bound to change. So I think a long time ago we had this perception that yoga was it was a holistic way of living. It was a way of life. Everybody was like a lot of people were going to yoga class, but we weren't really Instagramming about it. Now you're Instagramming about it, and although the perception has changed about what yoga is, I think the essence of the practice still remains. I mean, it is still a practice for holistic health. It's still a practice which is very much relevant for mental health, which is a very pressing issue these days. So I think the perception has changed in that sense, just because it's become perhaps more commodified now. But yeah, it remains essentially a practice for holistic health, for holistic well-being. So yeah.
As a child, I certainly went with my father to train with the yoga sir. And now, of course, everything's changed so much. But just following up on that first question, Pragya, why do you think yoga works? Simply, does it work at all?
Well, there are many reasons for why it works. But I think you need to look at the science behind it. Yoga is not it's not just like a fitness fad. Right now we do look at it as a fitness fad because it's become very glamorous, because all the celebrities are doing it. But yoga is one of the darshanas in Hindu tradition, which means it's one of the basic philosophies in this area, like what you would call India right now, but the Indus Valley civilization. So it's fundamentally very sound. It's not something that has been invented. It was a study. And people, ancient sages and scientists now have actually studied how the practice of yoga impacts your nervous system. Your nervous system is divided into, like the central nervous system has a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for like your fight and flight reaction. And the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for the relaxation, the rest and relaxation. Now, most of us are always stimulated. I mean, we live in such a time that you're constantly stimulated, if not by stress, then by information, like constant bombardment of information to your mind. And which just has resulted in a society which is finding it increasingly difficult to rest. And yoga, that's where yoga comes in. We go to class every day, but we, thinking that you're doing a very physical practice, we don't realize that it is actually affecting your nervous system. That combination of breath and movement, it affects your nervous system. So it's a very scientific process where you're not dealing with just the nervous system as you know it, the fight or flight. You're dealing with your nervous system for the rest and relaxation aspect of it. And that is why it works, because it's impacting your nervous system, which no other practice does. No other physical practice, no other practice for mental health does. This is actually going directly to the root cause, which is basically trying to put your nervous system into balance again. And that is why it works. Yeah.
That was a good explanation. I want to segue from here into talking about your book, which is titled Beyond Asanas, The Myths and Legends Behind Yogic Postures. And that's a very, very pretty cover. So the photography for this is by Joel Koechlin.
Koechelin, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little about your collaboration with him, because, I mean, as I skim through this book, the photographs are just fantastic. And tell us a little about what went behind styling these photographs, your choice of apparel, which is very unusual when you look at other yoga books, the location. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, the collaboration of Joel was kind of like an accident. I stumbled upon a picture. I think that he had tweeted of his daughter, Kalki Kaklan, who's also done the forward for this book. And the picture that he'd taken was a very simple picture. It was just Kalki in like an off-white sari and with just like the sun. You know, it was a picture which was so beautiful in its simplicity. So I was actually visiting my parents in the Netherlands for about 3 months during that time. I had a lot of time to sit on the internet, and I stumbled upon this picture, and I found out that Kalki's dad is a photographer. So I shot him a mail saying that I'm a budding yoga teacher, and you're really accomplished. So I don't even know if I can afford a photo session with you, but I thought I would just write you a mail. And he replied to me and he said, I'm responding to you because you made me laugh. And of course, as soon as you come back to India, we can work on something. And at that time, I'd wanted to work on a calendar. I wanted to capture images of my asanas and use them perhaps for a calendar, perhaps for my website. And there was a lot of back and forth. Like when I went into Joel's studio, the whole creative process tends to be very organic in nature. What works, what he thinks works, what I think works. And during that time, I told him that we got along really well. So I told him one of my childhood dreams is to write a book. And now that I'm a yoga teacher, I think I should write a book about yoga. So he said, well, I'll do the photographs for you. And so it started off like that. And the next meeting I had with him, I had a proper plan that we are going to do a bestseller, and it's going to show yoga in this light. And a lot of his inputs with the photographs, his perception of yoga as an art. And again, he was very clear that he didn't want what's usually in yoga books these days, which is like spandex, a lot of yoga tights and yoga pants and all of that. He wanted to depict yoga in a way that we've forgotten it. It's about movement, it's about art, it's about appreciating the human body. It's more deep than what we see. So he had that in mind. I wanted to tell a lot of stories, which again, I think the focus when we talk about the changing perceptions, we're no longer talking about the stories behind the asanas. We're no longer talking about the cultural significance of yoga. We're only talking about weight loss, which is okay, but there is so much more that you can gain from yoga as a practice. So that's how the collaboration happened. Yeah.
You mentioned weight loss. In one of our earlier conversations, you mentioned that weight loss was one of your primary motivators to get into yoga. But there are varying points of view about the connection between yoga and speedy weight loss. How has that been for you, A, as a yoga practitioner yourself, and B, as a yoga teacher? What kind of transformation are you seeing in students who come to you, looking for weight loss and speedy weight loss?
Yeah, I think, I did come to yoga for weight loss. I was close to 70 kgs. At my heaviest, and so I started life as a software engineer, and that's not the kind of job which enables you to remain fit. You're sitting for a long time, and from about like 50 kgs, I went up to 70 kgs, which was quite alarming. And I tried many things to lose weight. I was working at Infosys during the time, so I would go to the Infosys gym. I tried many things, and I think yoga was like the last thing I tried. Okay, and I would go to class like really early. There was an early morning class, and I went to a power yoga class. And for those of you who've been following yoga for even about a decade, you would remember power yoga. Kareena Kapoor went to size 0 with yoga. I went to those classes, and I did lose a lot of weight. But now in retrospect, when I think about the weight loss, I don't think it was just about weight loss. It was not just about, controlling what I was eating and then working out to lose it. It was not just that. I think yoga was working on getting my body back into balance. And yoga is about balance. So whereas you might go to the gym, to kind of control your diet and the calories, and you might use various apps to do that. When I went to yoga, and I was trying to deal with my weight in that way, but when I went to yoga class, it was not really about that. Like I went to class, I went regularly, I was enjoying the practice, and unbeknownst to me, like I did not realize what was happening, but what was happening was that my whole lifestyle was coming back to a balance, I was waking up early, I was going to class, therefore I was sleeping early. By 9:30 I'd be asleep. If you sleep early, your metabolism is working at its optimal. If you're doing yoga in the morning, you tend to eat better throughout the day. So I didn't realize what was happening. It was not just that I was doing 108 Surya Namaskars, and that's why, again, the relevance of yoga today, because we have a lot of, especially in Bangalore, software engineers who are sitting for 16 hours a day, which is what I was doing. And I always suggest this to my students who are software engineers, that if you really do want to get your health back on track, not just weight, but your health back on track, you have to look for a balance. And the easiest way to do that is just through a regular yoga class, because it's working on so many different dimensions. So, yeah. Your mic probably is not working. Yeah, take mine. Take mine.
Okay, I want to come back to the book briefly again. When I see the book, one of the things that really sets it apart is the fascinating mythological stories that you've added with each of the asanas. Now, this is truly unusual. And tell us a bit about what went into the research behind those stories. How did you make those connections? And maybe you could give us an example or two, with an asana, and the whole process. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think, again, the process was fairly organic. So I didn't grow up in India, so I didn't grow up listening to a lot of stories that in India we take for granted. You live with your grandparents and they tell you a lot of story, and just everyday life, you hear so many connotations and allusions to stories in like the Ramayana. I didn't grow up with any of that. And when I started doing yoga, every story would be new to me. If whether you were talking about Hanuman or a sage, all the stories would be new to me. And I think that was the fresh perspective that I used in the book. Because these stories, were new to me. They were like kind of stimulating my imagination. I wanted to know more. It wasn't something that I'd heard from when I was little. And so when I thought about writing a book about yoga, I looked at what's there in the market. I looked at a lot. I've read, because I study yoga as well, I read a lot of the books that were there in the market. And I found that it was very difficult to find stories about the myths behind the asanas. Also because I think we're all just focused on doing the asanas correctly. I think that's what, yes, if you're a beginner to yoga, and a beginner can be up to 10 years as well. If you've been practicing yoga for 10 years, you're still a beginner. You're still focused on, bending a lot, and you're not really thinking about the significance of the asana. And I could not find any information in like the books that I'd read and in popular media. So then, I thought, okay, let me delve deeper into it. And once I had like spoken to a lot of people, I went into like Vedic literature. I made a lot of connections, which I didn't find, which weren't very clear. It was a lot of looking at connections, cross connections, references from different texts, and of course symbolism as well. So the research was a lot of that. It was just like gleaning information from whatever the sources were available to me, as well as talking to people, talking to a lot of family, because of course our tradition is very oral also. It's oral tradition, and then sort of putting everything together. It was just like I was a yoga practitioner, and I was thinking about what is beyond just touching my toes. And that's what I've tried to like really bring out in this book. It's not so much about the asanas, because if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that a lot of people might consider me an intermediate or an advanced yogi, but that's not at this point. I'd say that's not what yoga is about. It's a lot about the stories behind the asanas, the significance. Why, like for instance, if we were to talk about my favorite story in the book, it's Hanuman asana, and we all know Hanuman. But why is yes, he's a very significant demigod, but but why should we why is Hanuman asana one of the most advanced asanas in yoga? And when I was reading stories about Hanuman, there was not one thing. We were talking, all stories talk about how brave he was, so powerful, obliterates all fear in your mind. We all grew up with these stories. You all grew up with these stories. I didn't grow up with these stories. So when I came across these stories, I was like, there has to be something more, because face it, all gods are powerful. Greek gods are, all gods are powerful, across cultures, across countries. So what is the significance? And I found I was just thinking about the Hanuman asana one day, and I found it was not the fact that he was so powerful. It was not the fact that he was fearless. It was exactly the opposite. He was there was a lot of self-doubt in him. He was very human in that sense that Hanuman asana is basically the forward splits, and we believe that he flew into Lanka with one leg, one leg forward, one leg back. So he's flying into Lanka. And when I was thinking about this story, I was thinking, imagine Hanuman having grown up, like when he was growing up, he didn't realize how powerful he was. He was actually sent to live with the Vanar Sena in the jungle so that he wouldn't disrupt the life of everybody around him because he didn't understand his own power. As he grew up, he forgot that he was so powerful. Right before he had to leap to go to Lanka for perhaps one of the most significant events in mythology. There would have been a moment of self-doubt, and we all face that self-doubt. And the heroism in that, the reason Hanuman asana is one of the most advanced asanas is not because it's so difficult to do. It's because what he did at that time was he took a leap of faith. He said, okay, yes, I have these self-doubts, but people are telling me, my friends are telling me that I'm so powerful. Let me take a leap of faith. So it was about overcoming that obstacle, which is a very human thing, which is something that we do on a daily basis. So that's one of my favorite stories from the book, because yes, you have all these stories and you've grown up with these stories, but when you really think about Hanuman, when you think about any mythological character, you must look at what we have to learn from them, and what we have to learn from them is a little bit of what makes us human, that humane aspect of them. And in Hanuman's case, like he's Veer Hanuman. In his case, it was self-doubt and the overcoming of self-doubt. And that's actually what a lot of like what yoga is about, what yogasanas are about. Yeah.
In the process of writing your book, okay, so the book was released on International Yoga Day, 21st
Yes. Yeah.
June this year.
Yeah.
So in that process of research to put this book together and after the release of the book, did you find that your own personal practice has changed, or if it has, how do you see yoga differently now?
Yeah, I think your yoga practice is bound to change month on month, year on year. If you stick to a yoga class, it changes for everybody. I think writing the book was a part of like that change. I stopped looking at it just as a practice that I was good at, or that my teacher said I was good at. I started looking at it more like a lifestyle, a life practice. And all yoga practitioners will tell you that the first few years of yoga practice, you're going to class every day. You're feeling bad if you miss a class, and I can't touch my toes, or I can't put the leg behind my head. And in fact, Hanuman asana was one of my goal asanas. That was like hashtag yoga goals for me. And now it took 6 years to write the book. Through the whole process of writing the book, my asanas have become better because I practice daily. I have a very intense practice. But now I feel that it's not really about the asanas, it's about beyond asanas. And the book is aptly titled Beyond Asanas. I think that's how my practice has changed. I've started to see what yoga has to offer to me and to everybody, besides just
More than just the physical aspect
Yeah.
of it. Today yoga is such an entrenched part of popular culture, that you were also mentioning that there are more yoga teachers today than there are students. Do you see that as a positive, as a yoga teacher yourself, or do you see that somewhere diluting this Guru Shishya Parampara, one of the primary pillars of the yogic tradition, which holds yoga together? So, how do you see this? We're just churning out yoga teachers by the dozens.
I think it's just a reflection of our times. It has a lot to do with Instagram. Like all these the countless Instagram accounts where people are just doing intense asanas, and I think it's just a reflection of our times. Yoga, being a yoga teacher, again, has now become a very glamorous thing. Now yoga teachers are not just your kurta pajama clad, guys who are coming. So it's become glamorous, and I'm happy that this ancient practice is still relevant. To me, it just goes to show that it's still relevant. And I think yoga as a practice is so fundamentally sound. It's so entrenched in our culture, in our traditions, in the Vedas themselves that everybody could be a yoga teacher and it still will not detract from the essence of the practice. It's fundamentally very powerful, very strong. A fad, a fitness fad, a very fancy teacher's training, it's not going to detract from anything. I'm not one of those people who think of Western invasions. And no, I think yoga is it's here to stay. It's always been there. It's there now, and it's always going to endure. I don't really see it as something to worry about. I'm quite confident that yoga is here to stay, and we can interpret it in different ways, and that's all it is. Yeah.
Great. I think we can take audience questions now. We have 5 minutes.
Hi Pragya, I'm Pragya here. I'm from the yoga capital, which is Mysore. And I took up yoga because it was something that everyone in Mysore wants to do. Somewhere I feel, with like there are more yoga teachers than students, it's become so commercial that it's lost its essence of, what yoga really does. Balance and the whole thing, of combining traditional with modern weight loss. Teachers start pushing you, to do asanas even when you're not ready and you enjoy yourself. So how do you think that we could slowly bring back that balance into what yoga's real focus and essence is, and not make it something like stand in one hand and enjoy yourself?
I think I don't really think that we are on that we should necessarily be on a campaign to bring yoga back to what we perceive it used to be. The Guru Shishya Parampara has been a difficult one. Even if we talk about ancient times, Vedic times, you did not go to one teacher and find your teacher. You still had to go through many teachers to find your teacher. And so today, when you have a lot of seekers, those seekers will have to go through, you will have to go through that process. And that process is what builds you as a yogi. So in a way, it's a blessing. You as a student of yoga, as a seeker of the yogic path, you have to really be in touch with whether you feel this teacher works for you. Regardless of what the advertisement around this teacher is, you really have to kind of connect with yourself in that way. So the test to find a teacher has just become a little more difficult. But then yoga is a lifelong quest. So I don't see that as a problem. And also I feel that as students of yoga, we should not be worried about trying to follow an archaic process of getting the learning. We should be more concerned with what is available to us now, what fits into my lifestyle and the constraints of my lifestyle right now, and try to make the most of it. And that is living the yogic path. It is not going to, a teacher who's perceived. Again, it's always a perception, a good teacher, a commercialized teacher, But it's about going to different teachers, finding what resonates with you. And right now it may resonate with you. 2 years down the line, that teacher may not resonate with you. And then it's about finding the next teacher and learning. So it's a constant growth. It's constant progress. And as a seeker, as a yoga student, I would advise everybody not to really worry about it. If you should give a teacher a go, you should give a practice a go, a try, honest try. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, you go to another one. That's always been a process. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Hi, my name's Randall. So I got into yoga like a year back, and going by the title of your book, you said Beyond Asanas, right? And yogic postures. I wanted to ask you whether you touch upon the spiritual aspects of yoga. So with regards to like introspecting in yourself, and also talking about possibly altered states of consciousness and all that. So I wanted to know whether your book touches on that, and do you think that should be integrated in today's yoga classes? And could you suggest also something for a beginner to go into that path? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, you need to read my book. Number one. So I'm not going to answer the first question. Okay. Your second question was about altered state of of consciousness. Yeah, the meditative. Okay, so okay, that is a question that most yoga practitioners come across at some point or the other. Now, for a beginner, no, in fact, for all yoga practitioners, the the one rule that you need to follow every single day, every moment of the day, is practice, asana practice. That is your roadmap into anything else. That's your entry into an altered state of consciousness, into meditation. Your practice is the most important thing. Your mind is very difficult to control. Okay, your body is easier than your mind. So if whenever I tell a beginner that you're supposed to practice 5 times a day, 5 times a week, 6 times a week, I've always found students find it difficult to do that. They think sitting in meditation for 30 minutes every day is easy, but I'm telling you, meditation is very hard. But if you do come to your mat 6 days a week, the kind of discipline that requires, the kind of commitment and dedication that requires, it molds you to eventually take up a meditation practice. You know, and also I think a meditation practice is a very it's not easy in more ways than one. First of all, it's difficult to sit in meditation. Very few people can sit up straight. You know, it's difficult to sit in meditation. Number two, introspection is not easy. You know, this everybody is on this quest to find out who am I. You know, but it's not easy, because sometimes, you know, the good comes with the bad. It's not easy to deal with the bad parts of you. When you introspect, everything comes, the good parts of you, the bad parts of you, and you need to be strong enough to deal with that. So when you have a regular yoga practice, asana practice, and every day you're dealing with, this asana is easy for me, that is difficult for me, deal with it. Eventually, it molds your mind, it trains your mind to be able to introspect. Meditation comes after 5 to 7 years of a good asana practice. And do I think that it should be integrated in yoga classes? Yes, of course. The idea of introspection, we all need that. At whatever phase you're in terms of yoga practice, even if you're not doing a regular asana practice, I think there's a lot to be said with sitting down for 5 minutes every day and really thinking about the day. You know, introspection is important for everybody. Yes, yeah.